Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and settle in for a story that isn't about thrilling battles or grand empires. Instead, we're going to explore something far more mundane, yet utterly captivating in its harshness why it truly sucked to be alive in the medieval times. Specifically, we're going to start with a particularly bleak reality, what it was like to be a leper. Trust me, you'll be incredibly grateful for modern medicine and your perfectly isolated living space by the end of this. This isn't just about itchy skin or a cough. This is about a pervasive, often deadly, struggle against disease, poverty, and profound societal fear. And let's be real, you probably wouldn't have survived past childhood, let alone dodged a medieval plague. Not a chance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a muddy, unpaved street. The air thick with the smell of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and something vaguely rotten from the open sewers running down the middle of the thoroughfare. The year is, let's say, 1250, somewhere in Western Europe. You're bundled in coarse wool, and the chill seeps into your bones. Despite the layers, your teeth chatter. Not just from the cold, but from a pervasive sense of anxiety that seems to hang in the very atmosphere. Life here is precarious, brutal, and short. And then you hear it, a distinct, rhythmic rattling growing closer. It's a sound that strikes fear into the hearts of everyone, a sound that signals utter despair and total social abandonment. It's the leper's bell. Imagine the scene: a lone figure, cloaked and hooded, slowly shuffling down the path. You instinctively recoil, pulling your cloak tighter, perhaps even clutching a small amulet or making a quick sign of the cross. They carry a wooden clapper or a small bell, shaking it constantly, not to draw attention, but to warn you, to tell you to stay away. This wasn't just a physical disease, it was a spiritual curse. A visible sign of God's displeasure, or so many believed. The fear was palpable, almost a living entity itself, shaping every interaction, every glance, when you were diagnosed with leprosy in medieval times. Your life as you knew it simply ended. It wasn't a doctor in a clean room giving you a prognosis. It was often a priest, perhaps followed by a bishop, performing a terrifying ceremony known as the separatio leprosorum. The separation of lepers. You were literally declared dead to the world. Imagine attending your own funeral, watching as earth was sprinkled on your head, hearing the solemn pronouncements that you were no longer part of society, no longer counted among the living. You were now a pariah, cast out from your family, your village, your church. Your home was gone. Your possessions, if you had any, were confiscated or redistributed. You couldn't touch anything that belonged to a healthy person. Couldn't share food. Couldn't drink from the same well. If you ventured into a village or town, you had to stay on the road, speak to no one directly, and always sound your bell to announce your approach. You were forbidden from entering churches, markets, mills, or bakeries. You were often required to wear specific clothing, a gray cloak, perhaps, or a distinctive cross, marking you out for all to see. You were, effectively, a living ghost, utterly alone in a world that feared and reviled you. The physical reality of leprosy, or what was thought to be leprosy as many skin conditions were misdiagnosed, was terrifying. It wasn't always immediately disfiguring, but over time, if it progressed, it could lead to nerve damage, which meant you might lose sensation in your extremities. Imagine cutting yourself, or burning your hand, and not feeling it. This loss of sensation led to repeated injuries, infections, and eventually the loss of fingers and toes. A phenomenon called autoamputation. Lesions and nodules would appear on the skin, particularly the face, giving rise to the leonine facies, or lion-like face, which further solidified the public's fear. Ulcers, blindness, and vocal cord damage, leading to a hoarse voice, were also common. The slow, inexorable decay of your own body, combined with the complete abandonment by society, made it a truly horrific existence. Lepers were often confined to leper colonies or lazarets, segregated communities usually built far outside the city walls. While some of these communities were relatively well organized, supported by charitable donations and run by monastic orders, many were desolate, overcrowded, and lacking even basic necessities. You would live in squalor, surrounded by others suffering the same fate, often with limited medical care, if any. The diet would be meager, sanitation almost non-existent, and the constant threat of other diseases, like dysentery or typhus, would loom large. This was not a place for healing, but a place to await death. Slowly and miserably, one fascinating, yet grim. Historical fact is the sheer number of leper houses that sprang up across Europe during the High Middle Ages. It's estimated there were up to 19,000 leper houses throughout Christendom by the 13th century. This widespread construction speaks volumes about the pervasive fear of the disease and the desperate measures taken to isolate those afflicted. It was a societal response driven by panic and a profound lack of medical understanding. This common historical fact often isn't highlighted enough when we talk about medieval public health. The psychological impact of such an existence is almost unimaginable. The constant awareness of your own decaying body, the complete loss of identity, the unceasing fear in the eyes of others, and the utter loneliness would chip away at your sanity. You were alive, yet condemned to a living death, a constant reminder of your perceived sins. Historians still debate whether the severity of societal ostracization for lepers was primarily due to religious dogma or simply profound medical ignorance and fear of contagion. Either way, the outcome was the same: a life of unremitting suffering. So the next time you feel a bit under the weather, or just annoyed by a minor inconvenience, remember the leper's bell? Remember the chilling fear it evoked, and the brutal reality of a life lived as an outcast. Stripped of everything but your affliction. It puts a lot of things into perspective, doesn't it? You've just glimpsed the terrifying isolation of the leper, a stark reminder of disease in the medieval world. But leprosy was far from the only horror. You are now stepping deeper into a time when illness wasn't just a physical ailment, it was often a death sentence, a source of profound fear and misunderstanding, shaping daily life in ways you can barely imagine. This is the brutal reality of ancient diseases, where contagion was a mystery and survival was often a matter of pure luck. The air around you still carries a faint, unpleasant odor, but it's now mixed with the acrid scent of sickness, the sweet, cloying smell of decay. You hear the hacking coughs from darkened hovels, the low moans of fever, and the mournful tolling of church bells that, even from a distance, signal another death. Medical understanding, as you know it, simply doesn't exist. Instead, you find a chaotic mix of superstition, rudimentary herbal remedies, and a pervasive belief in divine punishment or malevolent spirits. Imagine the common cold. In your world, it's an annoyance. Perhaps a few days of sniffles and a sore throat. In medieval times, however, even a simple cold could quickly escalate into a deadly respiratory infection without antibiotics. What began as a mild cough could turn into bronchitis or pneumonia, filling your lungs with fluid. You would experience agonizing shortness of breath, a searing pain in your chest, and a fever that would leave you delirious, thrashing in a sweat-soaked bed. Your body, already weakened by poor diet and constant toil, would struggle to fight off the infection. Many would simply suffocate, their lungs overwhelmed in a prolonged, agonizing struggle for breath. The simple fact is, common respiratory illnesses were significant killers. Then there was dysentery, often called the bloody flux. You might contract it from contaminated water, unwashed food, or simply from the appalling sanitation. Imagine the agonizing stomach cramps, the relentless diarrhea, often mixed with blood. You would suffer from extreme dehydration, your body rapidly losing vital fluids, leaving you weak, dizzy, and constantly thirsty. The constant urge to relieve yourself, combined with the debilitating weakness, would leave you utterly exhausted without rehydration salts or modern medical intervention. Many, especially children and the elderly, would simply waste away, their bodies unable to absorb nutrients, dying from profound fluid loss. This was a common affliction, running rampant through crowded communities. One particularly terrifying and widespread disease was typhus. Often spread by lice and fleas, it would sweep through armies, prisons, and impoverished towns. You would suddenly be struck by a high fever, crippling headaches, and body aches so severe they would make every movement agony. A distinctive rash, often reddish-brown spots, would appear on your skin. As the disease progressed, you might become delirious, confused, or even fall into a stupor without proper hygiene, which was non-existent, and without antibiotics. The mortality rate was incredibly high. Imagine the terrifying spread of such a disease through a densely packed, unhygienic city, turning entire districts into feverish nightmares. And of course, we cannot forget the most infamous of all, the bubonic plague, or the Black Death. This wasn't just a disease, it was an apocalypse, wiping out an estimated 30–50% of Europe's population in the mid-14th century. Imagine waking up with a sudden fever, chills, and overwhelming fatigue. Then, within a day or two, you discover a horrifying, swollen, painful lymph node. A bubo, typically in your groin, armpit, or neck. These buboes could be as large as an apple. The pain from these swellings would be excruciating. As the disease progressed, your skin might turn black due to internal bleeding, earning it the terrifying moniker. You would suffer from delirium, vomiting, and internal hemorrhaging. Death often came swiftly, within days, in agonizing pain. The speed and lethality of the plague created an unprecedented level of fear and despair, shattering the fabric of society, a chilling, yet often overlooked. Detail about the Black Death is the sheer speed with which it killed. Victims could go from perfectly healthy to dead within 24 to 48 hours. This swiftness left no time for mourning, no time for proper burials, often leading to mass graves and a complete breakdown of social order. This common historical fact of rapid onset and mortality is crucial to understanding its impact. The medical treatments for these diseases were often more torturous than the ailments themselves. Bleeding, cutting a vein to let out bad blood, cupping, applying heated cups to draw blood to the surface, and purging, inducing vomiting or diarrhea were common practices, often weakening an already sick patient. Superstition reigned supreme. People wore amulets, chanted prayers, and sought the advice of local healers who relied on a mix of herbal remedies and often baseless beliefs. Historians still debate the true efficacy of many medieval herbal remedies, with some offering mild relief and others being entirely useless or even harmful. The lack of understanding about germs meant that hygiene practices, like simply washing hands or quarantining the sick effectively, were largely unknown or ignored. So, while you might complain about flu season or a particularly nasty cold, remember the medieval person. Remember that for them. Every sniffle was a potential death sentence. Every stomach ache a descent into agonizing dysentery. Their lives were a constant, precarious dance with pathogens, where the smallest infection could quickly spiral into an unstoppable force, leaving them alone, in agony, with little hope of survival. It truly sucked to be sick back then. You've just survived, metaphorically speaking, the terrors of medieval disease, from the isolating plague of leprosy to the lethal common cold. Now, let's wade into another pervasive, inescapable horror of daily life, the filth and famine that defined existence for most people in the Middle Ages. Your modern senses, accustomed to clean water and plentiful food, are about to be profoundly assaulted. The air around you isn't just slightly unpleasant now, it's a thick, noxious blend of human and animal waste. Stale food, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present stench of decaying refuse. You notice the ground beneath your feet isn't solid earth, but a perpetually damp, squelching mixture of mud, straw, and excrement. The sounds are a cacophony of animal noises. Pigs grunting, chickens clucking, dogs barking, all living in disturbingly close proximity to humans. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a fundamental, unavoidable part of life that contributed directly to widespread disease and misery. Let's start with sanitation, or more accurately, the complete and utter lack thereof. Imagine a medieval town. There are no sewage systems, no garbage collection, and certainly no concept of plumbing. Human and animal waste was often simply thrown into the streets from windows, or allowed to accumulate in open cesspits. Rivers, which were also sources of drinking water, became open sewers, laden with waste from upstream towns and villages. When it rained, the streets would turn into rivers of muck, carrying all manner of filth directly into wells and homes. You'd find yourself picking your way carefully through piles of refuse, trying to avoid stepping in something truly disgusting. The smell, especially in summer, would be utterly overwhelming, a constant, sickening presence that you would, ironically, eventually become desensitized to. This lack of hygiene was a primary driver for the rampant diseases we just discussed, and it wasn't just the public spaces. Your own home, if you were a peasant or a common town dweller, would be little better. Animals often lived inside with families for warmth, adding to the general mess. Open hearths meant constant smoke, coating everything in soot. Bathing was a rare luxury, more often done for ritualistic or medicinal purposes than for daily cleanliness. You'd likely go weeks, if not months, without a full bath, relying on occasional wipes with damp cloths. Your clothes, made of rough wool or linen, would be worn day in and day out, accumulating dirt, sweat, and parasites. Imagine the pervasive itch, the constant discomfort of fleas and lice crawling on your skin. It truly sucked to be clean, because it was virtually impossible. Then there's the issue of food and drink, you might think. Well, at least they ate fresh, organic food. And while some foods were certainly fresher, the concept of food safety as you know it was non-existent. Without refrigeration, food spoiled quickly. Meat was often heavily salted or smoked to preserve it. But even then, it could go rancid. Grain, the staple of the medieval diet, was susceptible to rot, mold, and vermin. Imagine eating bread made from flour that contained ground-up insects. Or worse. Ergot, a fungus that could cause terrifying hallucinations, and a burning sensation known as St. Anthony's fire. Your diet would be incredibly monotonous, primarily consisting of grains bread, porridge, gruel, sometimes supplemented by vegetables from a small garden. Meat was a luxury for the wealthy, and even then, often tough and heavily spiced to mask its age. Protein for the common person often came from meager eggs or small, scrawny livestock. Malnutrition was rampant, particularly during the harsh winter months when fresh food was scarce. You'd be constantly battling hunger, a dull ache in your stomach that never truly went away. The idea of a varied, balanced diet was simply inconceivable, and water. Forget about a clean tap. Your drinking water would likely come from a communal well or a local river, both of which were frequently contaminated by the very waste we just talked about. To make it safer, people often drank ale or weak beer instead of water. Why? Because the brewing process involved boiling, which killed many of the harmful bacteria. So, while you might not think of medieval people as constantly drunk, they were often mildly inebriated simply to stay hydrated safely. Imagine a world where your daily hydration involved a constant low-level buzz. A common historical fact is that people, even children, drank weak alcoholic beverages throughout the day because water was often unsafe. One unique detail that speaks volumes about medieval hygiene is the common sight of human waste being used as fertilizer in fields adjacent to towns, often washed into water sources. This direct link between waste disposal and food production created a continuous cycle of contamination, perpetuating disease. It's a stark reminder of the fundamental lack of understanding about germ theory. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval people understood the link between sanitation and disease, with some evidence suggesting a rudimentary awareness, but certainly not a scientific one. So, you've not just experienced the lack of modern conveniences, but a pervasive, grinding reality of filth that permeated every aspect of medieval life. Your nose twitches in phantom disgust, and you find yourself appreciating the simple miracle of a clean, running tap more than ever before. You've just navigated the noxious odors and unsanitary realities of medieval life. From the ever-present filth to the precariousness of food and water. Now, let's narrow our focus and consider a specific segment of the population whose daily existence was uniquely burdened women in medieval times. Their challenges weren't just about general hardship, they were deeply rooted in societal expectations. Legal limitations and the constant, overwhelming demands of childbirth and domestic life. The air around you still feels heavy, but now it carries a different weight. The unseen pressures of expectation, the faint scent of stale hearth smoke, and perhaps the quiet murmur of a lullaby. You see women, often bent with toil, moving through their days with a relentless, quiet determination. Their lives, regardless of social standing, were often defined by limitations that would be unthinkable to you. Imagine, first, the sheer physical labor. If you were a peasant woman, your day began before dawn and ended long after dusk. You weren't just managing a household, you were an integral part of the agricultural economy. You'd be out in the fields, alongside the men, planting, weeding, harvesting. You'd gather firewood, tend to a meager garden, and care for livestock. Back in the hovel, your work continued grinding grain, baking bread, spinning wool, weaving cloth, making and mending clothes for the entire family. Every item of clothing, every meal, every aspect of daily life was the result of incredibly labor-intensive processes. There were no washing machines, no supermarkets, no ready-made garments. Your body would ache constantly, your hands would be calloused and rough, and exhaustion would be your constant companion. Then there was the constant cycle of childbirth and child-rearing. For most medieval women, marriage meant children, and many children. Contraception was virtually non-existent or ineffective, and large families were seen as both a blessing and an economic necessity. More hands for labor. Imagine being pregnant year after year, often while still nursing a toddler and caring for other young children. Childbirth itself was incredibly dangerous. Without modern medicine, hygiene, or understanding of complications, both mother and child faced extremely high mortality rates. You'd give birth in your home, attended by local women, relying on traditional knowledge and prayers. The pain would be excruciating, the risk of infection ever present. Many women died in childbirth, a tragically common historical fact. A common historical fact is that maternal mortality rates were incredibly high. with estimates suggesting anywhere from 1 in 10 to 1 in 50 pregnancies resulted in the mother's death. This constant threat loomed over every woman's life, and even if you survived childbirth, the work didn't end. You were responsible for the care of numerous children, often losing several to the diseases we discussed earlier. The emotional toll of constant loss, of nurturing life only to see it extinguished by disease, would be profound, beyond the physical demands. There were significant legal and social limitations. If you were a woman, your legal identity was often subsumed by your husband's upon marriage. You couldn't own property independently, though there were regional variations and exceptions, particularly for widows or single women with specific trades. Enter into contracts, or represent yourself in court without your husband's consent or presence. Your primary role was defined by domesticity and procreation, while some aristocratic women wielded influence through their families or managed estates. This was an exception, not the rule. The vast majority of women had little to no formal education and were largely excluded from public life. Historians still debate the true extent of medieval women's agency and influence within their limited spheres, with some arguing for more hidden power structures than previously recognized. However, their overt lack of legal and political power is undeniable, even for women in towns. Life was hard. If you worked in a guild, you might be limited to certain roles or be paid less than your male counterparts. Many women worked in trades like brewing, baking, or textile production, but often in supporting roles or in less lucrative sectors. Imagine the difficulty of trying to earn a living in a society where your opportunities were inherently restricted, and your labor often undervalued. A unique detail that paints a grim picture of daily life for medieval women is the concept of churching. After childbirth, a woman was considered ritually unclean and could not re-enter the church or fully participate in community life until she underwent a purification ceremony. Often weeks after giving birth, this practice reinforced the idea of women's bodies as inherently problematic or dangerous, especially after something as natural as childbirth. It added another layer of social and religious restriction to their already challenging lives, reinforcing societal attitudes towards their roles and bodies. So, while life sucked for everyone in the Middle Ages, for women, it sucked in a particularly heavy, relentless way. You'd be living a life of constant physical exertion, burdened by endless childbirth and the ever-present threat of death, all within a legal and social framework that severely limited your autonomy. The phantom weight of a medieval woman's daily grind settles on your shoulders as you reflect on her unceasing struggle. You've just navigated the arduous existence of medieval women, a life defined by relentless toil and the ever-present dangers of childbirth. Now, let's shift our gaze to the even more precarious lives of those who were often seen, but rarely heard children in medieval times. Their childhoods, if they could even be called that, were a brutal sprint against overwhelming odds, where innocence was a luxury few could afford, and survival was a daily gamble. The air around you feels colder now, thinner, carrying the faint, high-pitched cries that quickly dissolve into the background hum of daily struggle. You see small figures, often indistinguishable from miniature adults in their rough, homespun clothes, engaged in labor that would shock your modern sensibilities. The concept of a protected, carefree childhood, filled with play and learning, is utterly alien here. Imagine being born in this era. Your first challenge was simply surviving infancy. Infant mortality rates were astronomically high, with estimates suggesting that anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 of all children died before reaching their first birthday. Diseases like dysentery, measles, and smallpox, for which there were no cures, swept through communities, indiscriminately claiming the youngest and most vulnerable. You'd be swaddled tightly, often left for long periods while your mother worked, and fed whatever meager sustenance was available. Your parents, though they certainly loved you, would likely have a grim, pragmatic understanding that your survival was far from guaranteed. The loss of a child was a common, heartbreaking reality that families endured with a mix of grief and stoicism. If you somehow managed to survive infancy, your childhood quickly transitioned into a period of early labor. Forget playgrounds and school books. By the age of 5 or 6, you'd already be contributing to the household economy. If you were a peasant child, you'd be tasked with scaring birds from crops, collecting firewood, fetching water, or tending to younger siblings. As you grew, your responsibilities would increase, moving on to tasks like herding livestock, helping with planting and harvesting, or assisting in household crafts like spinning and weaving. There was no distinction between child's work and adult's work. Everyone contributed to survival. Your small hands would quickly become calloused, your back would ache from bending, and your days would be filled with relentless, often monotonous, physical exertion. Education, for the vast majority, was non-existent. Unless you were born into a wealthy aristocratic family or destined for the church, you would not learn to read or write. Your education came from doing, from watching your parents and neighbors, learning the necessary skills for survival and your future role in society. Your world would be incredibly small, rarely extending beyond your village or local market. The concept of a broader world, of distant lands and diverse cultures, would be largely unknown to you. The dangers of daily life for a medieval child were relentless. There were no safety regulations, no child-proofed homes, open fires, sharp tools, deep wells and large, often unpredictable. Farm animals were constant threats. Accidents were common and often fatal. A fall from a cart, a burn from a hearth, or a kick from a horse could easily lead to severe injury, infection, and death, and beyond the physical dangers. There was the constant threat of famine, if crops failed, or war ravaged the land. Children were often the first to succumb to starvation and malnutrition, their small bodies simply unable to withstand prolonged periods of hunger. One poignant, yet often overlooked detail about medieval childhood is the relatively short period of what we might call childhood at all. As soon as a child could contribute meaningfully to labor, they were effectively considered small adults. There wasn't a prolonged adolescent phase as we understand it. By their early teens, many medieval individuals were already married, running their own households, or fully engaged in their adult trades. This common historical fact highlights the compressed nature of development and responsibility in this era. And then there's the distinct possibility of being sent away from home at a young age. Particularly if you were a boy, many children, especially from poorer families, would be sent to work as apprentices or servants in other households. This often meant living under the roof of a stranger, enduring harsh conditions, long hours, and sometimes abuse, all for the promise of learning a trade or simply having food and shelter. Imagine being separated from your family at the age of 7 or 8, thrust into an unfamiliar environment, forced to rely entirely on yourself. Historians still debate the emotional impact of such high child mortality rates on medieval parents, with some arguing for emotional detachment as a coping mechanism, while others highlight evidence of profound grief and love. Regardless, the brutal reality of watching so many children die, of having so many small coffins carried from your home, would undoubtedly shape your understanding of life and loss. So, as you reflect on the struggles of medieval children, you realize that their lives were a stark reminder of human resilience, but also of profound vulnerability. Their laughter, when it came, was perhaps all the more precious. A fleeting moment of joy in a childhood defined by labor, danger, and the omnipresent shadow of death. You might find yourself wanting to hug a modern-day child a little tighter after considering their distant past. You've just navigated the heartbreaking brevity and harsh realities of medieval childhoods. A a stark contrast to modern notions of innocence. Now, let's pivot slightly and examine something that, in your world, is a minor inconvenience. Perhaps a reason to call in sick for a day in the medieval world. However, it could be a harbinger of profound suffering and even death. We're talking about the seemingly benign common cold and how easily it could spiral into terror. The air around you feels deceptively brisk, perhaps a hint of dampness. You might even feel a phantom tickle in your own throat, a shiver running down your spine that isn't just from the historical chill. This is a reminder that in an age without advanced medical understanding, even the simplest viral infection could unleash devastating consequences, transforming a sniffle into a descent towards the grave. Imagine yourself, a medieval peasant. You wake up one morning with a slight tickle in your throat and a runny nose. In your modern life, you'd grab some tissues, maybe pop a cold and flu tablet, and probably complain a lot. Here you shrug it off, perhaps blaming the draft or a change in the weather. You still have to work. There are no sick days, no paid leave. Your family's survival depends on your labor. So you trudge out to the fields, or continue your weaving, your body aching, your head throbbing. But a simple cold in the medieval era wasn't just a runny nose. Your body, already weakened by a monotonous diet lacking essential vitamins and nutrients, was a much less effective fortress against infection. Constant exposure to unsanitary conditions, the omnipresent dust and smoke from open hearths, and the crowded living arrangements meant that any minor respiratory irritation could quickly escalate. That tickle in your throat turns into a persistent, hacking cough. Your chest tightens and each breath becomes a shallow, painful struggle. This is where the terror truly begins. What you have is likely turning into bronchitis or, even worse, pneumonia. Your lungs begin to fill with fluid, making it feel like you're constantly drowning. Even while on dry land, a high fever sets in, leaving you delirious, tossing and turning on your straw mattress, soaked in sweat. Your limbs ache. Your head pounds with relentless intensity. Your breathing becomes ragged, punctuated by wheezing and gasps for air. Every inhalation is agony. Every exhalation a desperate attempt to clear your congested lungs. There are no antibiotics, no oxygen masks, no nebulizers. Your family might offer you some crude herbal remedies, perhaps a poultice of herbs on your chest, or a bitter concoction to drink. These might offer minor symptomatic relief, but they won't cure the underlying bacterial infection that is now taking hold. You are entirely at the mercy of your body's dwindling strength. A common historical fact is that respiratory infections were leading causes of death across all age groups, even for young adults, often triggered by what we would consider a mild cold. The constant coughing can become so severe that it ruptures blood vessels, leaving streaks of blood in your phlegm, a terrifying sight for both you and your worried family. The exhaustion is profound. Simply breathing consumes an immense amount of energy. You grow weaker with each passing day, your body wasting away as the infection ravages your internal systems. Sleep offers little respite, as you're constantly jolted awake by violent coughing fits or the desperate need for air, one grim, yet often overlooked. Detail is the fear of contagion even from seemingly minor illnesses, while not as feared as leprosy or the plague. A persistent cough or fever would still cause unease in a community. People might subtly avoid you, fearing they or their family would catch whatever affliction you had. This added a layer of social anxiety to your already dire physical state, making you feel even more isolated in your suffering. Historians still debate the extent of folk remedies' effectiveness for respiratory illnesses, with some archaeological evidence suggesting certain plants might have had mild anti-inflammatory properties, but certainly no broad-spectrum antimicrobial action. So, that seemingly harmless sniffle escalates into a slow, agonizing suffocation, your lungs steadily failing until, one cold morning, you simply stop breathing. Your family mourns. perhaps attributing it to a bad draft or a divine judgment. Never understanding the invisible enemy that truly claimed you, you're left with a profound appreciation for the simple act of taking a deep, unlabored breath. The next time you feel a cold coming on, you might just find yourself sending a silent thank you to modern medicine, and perhaps a shiver of empathy for those who face such common ailments with nothing but a prayer and a fragile hope. You've just been reminded of the deadly potential of even a common cold in medieval times, a testament to the era's medical fragility. Now, let's go deeper into that grim reality and examine the very nature of medical miseries themselves. Imagine needing a doctor, or what passed for one, in an age where scientific understanding was nascent, and treatments were often more akin to torture than healing. The air around you in this imaginary medieval sick room is heavy with the scent of unwashed bodies, stale herbs, and something vaguely metallic, perhaps from crude instruments. You hear groans of pain, the worried murmurs of family members, and the hushed, almost ritualistic pronouncements of the healer. This isn't a place of sterile efficiency, it's a desperate gamble. Where hope often died before the patient, imagine you have a toothache. In your world, a quick trip to the dentist and a filling would sort it out. In medieval times, that dull ache would fester, becoming a throbbing, unbearable pain that radiates through your jaw and head. Without antibiotics, a simple cavity could lead to a severe infection, an abscess that swells your face, making it difficult to eat or even speak. The pain would be relentless, driving you to distraction. Your only solution would likely be a tooth pull, performed by a barber surgeon. Imagine being held down, often without any painkiller beyond perhaps a swig of ale, while a rough, unsterilized pair of pliers or a special dental key was used to wrench the offending tooth from your jaw. The agony would be blinding. The risk of infection from the unhygienic tools and environment incredibly high. Many would die from such infections, or simply endure lifelong pain and disfigurement. Then there were the broken bones. A fall from a horse, a crushing accident in the fields, or a simple misstep could lead to a fractured limb. There were no x-rays to accurately diagnose the break. A bone setter might attempt to realign the limb by feel, often painfully, and then apply a rudimentary splint, perhaps made of wood or stiffened leather. Infections were a constant threat, as open wounds from the break, or from the unhygienic setting process, could easily become gangrenous if the limb became infected beyond repair. The only option was amputation. Imagine a limb being sawed off, often without anesthesia beyond a desperate prayer and a strong drink. The searing pain of the blade, the gush of blood, and the subsequent days of agonizing recovery. Assuming you survived the shock and infection, this common historical fact of high mortality rates from even simple fractures is often overlooked. Consider the general approach to illness. The theory of the four humors. Medieval medicine largely believed that the body was composed of four basic fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was seen as an imbalance of these humors. So, if you had a fever, it might be due to an excess of blood, leading to a common treatment: bloodletting. Imagine a barber surgeon making an incision in your vein, or applying leeches to your skin, believing that draining your blood would restore balance, while sometimes incidentally beneficial in reducing blood pressure. More often than not, it would simply weaken an already sick patient, leading to anemia or further infection. You'd be left feeling weaker, paler, and still sick. But the treatment would be considered a success if you didn't die immediately. A lesser known, yet horrifying treatment was for certain forms of mental illness, or what was perceived as demonic possession. While some sufferers might find refuge in monasteries, others were subjected to brutal treatments like trepanation, where a hole was drilled into the skull, supposedly to release evil spirits. Imagine the primitive tools, the bone dust, and the excruciating pain, all performed without any real understanding of the brain's function. Survival was rare, and those who did endure it were often left with severe brain damage. One unique detail about medieval medicine is the reliance on urinalysis, but not as you know it. Physicians would often taste a patient's urine to diagnose illnesses, looking for sweetness a sign of diabetes, though they wouldn't know the cause, bitterness or cloudiness. While crude, it represented an attempt at systemic diagnosis, however unappetizing. Historians still debate the true level of diagnostic skill among medieval physicians, with some arguing that careful observation and the use of the four humors could sometimes lead to accurate, if unscientific, conclusions, while others emphasize the pervasive superstition. So, when you consider a visit to the doctor today, with sterile instruments, anesthesia, and effective medications, remember the medieval patient. Their medical care was a terrifying blend of ignorance, superstition, and painful procedures that often exacerbated their suffering. You're left with a profound sense of gratitude for the advancements that allow you to simply pop a pill for a headache, or get a filling for a cavity, rather than enduring medieval medical miseries. You've just winced your way through the rudimentary and often agonizing cures of medieval medicine. Now, let's explore the invisible, yet omnipresent, force that shaped every aspect of medieval life, from the cradle to the grave superstition's grip. This wasn't just about quaint beliefs or harmless folklore. It was a deeply ingrained system of thought that dictated daily decisions, explained the inexplicable, and often intensified the suffering of ordinary people. The air around you now feels thick with unseen energies, with whispers of curses and blessings, of divine wrath and benevolent spirits. You notice people instinctively making gestures, muttering incantations, or wearing protective charms. Every creaking floorboard, every sudden gust of wind, every unexpected illness wasn't just a random occurrence, it was a sign, an omen, a direct intervention from forces beyond human comprehension. This pervasive belief system dictated how people responded to illness, misfortune, and even their own destiny. Imagine a bad harvest. In your world, it's a matter of economics, weather patterns, and perhaps agricultural policy. In medieval times, it could be seen as God's punishment for collective sins, or the malevolent work of a witch casting a spell on the fields. You wouldn't just look for practical solutions, you'd organize processions, pray fervently, or perhaps even seek out someone to blame, often a vulnerable outsider. This deep-seated belief system could lead to cruel scapegoating. As people desperately sought to explain misfortunes and restore divine favor, then there was the constant fear of witchcraft and evil spirits. If a child fell ill suddenly, or livestock inexplicably died, it wasn't just disease, it was potentially the work of a witch residing in the village, or a demon haunting your home. People lived in perpetual fear of curses, of being overlooked by an evil eye. This fear fueled accusations, trials, and often brutal executions. Imagine living in a small, insular community, constantly suspicious of your neighbors, wondering if a sudden misfortune was a result of someone's malevolence. The paranoia would be suffocating, eroding trust and fostering a climate of fear. The common historical fact is that belief in witchcraft was deeply embedded across all social strata, leading to widespread witch hunts in later periods. But the underlying fear was present throughout the Middle Ages. Consider the role of religious relics and pilgrimages if you or a loved one fell ill. Beyond seeking rudimentary medical help, your primary hope often lay in divine intervention. You might undertake a grueling pilgrimage to a distant shrine, believing that touching the bone of a saint or bathing in holy water would bring about a miraculous cure. Imagine the arduous journey, often on foot, through dangerous landscapes, facing hunger, exposure, and banditry, all fueled by desperate hope. You'd spend what little money you had on offerings, praying tirelessly, believing that your suffering would be rewarded with healing. This deep faith, while a source of comfort, also placed immense pressure on individuals to seek spiritual solutions for very real, physical problems, a lesser known, yet fascinating detail of medieval superstition is the belief in apotropaic magic, rituals or objects meant to ward off evil. This wasn't necessarily witchcraft in the negative sense, but practical magic for protection. You might hang specific herbs over your door, wear amulets with carved symbols, or paint protective designs on your house to keep away malevolent spirits. The plague, or bad luck. Even something as simple as spitting on the ground after seeing a black cat, or avoiding stepping on cracks, would be common, ingrained behaviors. It highlights a desperate attempt to exert some control over an unpredictable and often terrifying world. Historians still debate the precise interplay between Christian doctrine and lingering pagan beliefs in medieval popular superstition, with some arguing for a largely harmonious syncretism, while others emphasize ongoing tension and attempts by the Church to suppress unorthodox practices. Regardless, the daily lives of ordinary people were a rich tapestry of both official religious belief and ancient, deeply ingrained folk practices aimed at influencing unseen forces. So, when you think about medieval life, it wasn't just the physical hardships, it was also the constant, gnawing presence of the unknown. The belief that every misfortune, every illness, every strange occurrence was a direct message from powerful, invisible forces. You lived in a world where explanations were often supernatural, and solutions often involved desperate pleas to saints or suspicious glances at your neighbor. It truly sucked to live under the constant, heavy hand of superstition, where rational thought often took a backseat to fear and divine judgment. Your mind feels a little lighter, untethered from such pervasive unseen forces. You've just emerged from the dense, unseen web of medieval superstition. Understanding how pervasive beliefs shaped every fear and hope. Now, let's bring it all down to earth, quite literally, and spend some time in the rough, calloused hands of the peasant's plight. This wasn't just a social class, it was a grueling, relentless existence of endless toil, vulnerability, and a constant battle against forces far beyond your control. The air around you is thick with the smell of damp earth, sweat, and the faint, sweet scent of growing crops. You hear the rhythmic scrape of a hoe, the low grunts of exertion, and the distant bleating of sheep. Your own hands feel oddly rough, and a dull ache begins to settle in your lower back. This is the bedrock of medieval society, where the vast majority of the population lived lives of unremitting labor, their existence inextricably tied to the land. Imagine you are a peasant. Your life is entirely dictated by the sun, the seasons, and the demands of your lord. You wake before dawn, often in a small, smoky hovel shared with your family and perhaps a few animals. Your first task is likely to be feeding the meager livestock, or preparing a basic breakfast of gruel or stale bread. There's no leisure, no relaxation, only the pressing urgency of survival. Your days are consumed by agricultural labor. From spring planting to autumn harvest, you are in the fields, working from sunrise to sunset. You till the soil with primitive tools, often a wooden plow pulled by oxen. You sow seeds by hand, meticulously weed the rows, and then, at harvest time, you cut, gather, and thresh grain. An exhausting and back-breaking process. All of this is done manually, without the aid of machinery. Your muscles scream in protest. Your skin is weathered and cracked from constant exposure to the elements, and your body is in a perpetual state of fatigue. This wasn't just a job, it was your entire life, defining every waking moment and every aching joint. And the fruits of your labor, a significant portion, sometimes a third or even a half, would go to your lord as rent or taxes. You also owed him a labor service, working on his lands for several days a week, often during the busiest times. before you could even tend to your own small plot. Then there was the tithe to the church, often another tenth of your produce. You were left with just enough to subsist, and sometimes not even that. This common historical fact of feudal obligations meant that even when crops were good, much of the surplus went to support the nobility and clergy. Keeping the peasant class in perpetual poverty, your diet, as we briefly touched on earlier, would be incredibly monotonous and often insufficient. Grains were the staple, providing most of your calories, but essential vitamins and proteins would often be lacking. Malnutrition was a constant companion, leaving you vulnerable to disease and further weakening your body. You'd know the gnawing pangs of hunger intimately, especially during the lean months before harvest. A few pieces of a contemporary joke might highlight the absurdity of their diet. Why did the peasant bring a ladder to the feast? Because he heard the soup was thin, a play on words for thin soup and thin air. Or perhaps, what's a medieval peasant's favorite game? Guess the insect in the porridge. And of course, the ever-present, why did the peasant wear a bell to warn people he had food? A dark joke on scarcity, beyond the physical toil. There was the constant vulnerability to external forces. A sudden flood could wipe out your crops. A prolonged drought could wither them to dust. War could sweep through your lands, bringing looting soldiers, burnt fields, and starvation. You had no insurance, no government aid, no safety net. Your entire existence was at the mercy of the weather, disease, and the whims of powerful lords. One little-known detail is the sheer lack of privacy and personal space. Peasants often lived in one-room hovels, with their entire family sleeping, eating, and living in the same cramped space, often alongside their domestic animals for warmth. This constant proximity, combined with the lack of sanitation, contributed to the rapid spread of disease. Historians still debate the degree of agency peasants had in negotiating their feudal obligations, with some arguing for subtle forms of resistance or collective action, while others emphasize their almost complete subservience to their lords. However, the overwhelming reality was one of limited control over their own lives. So, as you metaphorically stand in that muddy field, hoe in hand, feeling the ache in your back and the hunger in your belly, you truly grasp the grinding, unromanticized reality of the medieval peasant. Their lives were a relentless cycle of sunrise to sunset labor, with little reward, much risk, and no escape. You're left with a profound appreciation for the security and abundance of your own life, and perhaps a new understanding of the true meaning of hard work. You've journeyed through the harsh realities of medieval life, from the chilling isolation of the leper to the endless toil of the peasant, and the constant threat of disease and misfortune. As our exploration of what sucked in the Middle Ages draws to a close, you find yourself reflecting not just on the hardships endured, but on the profound comfort that history, ironically, can offer, and the deep appreciation it cultivates for your own modern existence. The imagined sounds of the medieval world, the leper's bell, the hacking cough, the grunt of labor. The distant church bell begin to fade into a soft, murmuring hum. The smells of smoke, unwashed bodies, and damp earth dissipate, replaced by the faint, clean scent of your own surroundings. You feel the soft fabric beneath you, the gentle whir of a fan, and a deep sense of quiet gratitude washes over you. This isn't just the end of a story. It's an invitation to consider how far humanity has come, and the preciousness of the everyday comforts you often take for granted. Consider, for a moment, the simple miracle of a clean glass of water. Remember how medieval people often drank weak ale just to avoid disease now? You can turn a tap and instantly access water that is purified, safe, and cold. Or think about that slight tickle in your throat. You might reach for a lozenge, take some cold medicine, or simply ride it out, confident that it won't escalate into a life-threatening pneumonia. Your access to antibiotics. to sterile hospitals, to trained medical professionals, is a luxury that medieval people could only dream of. This fundamental shift in public health alone is enough to inspire profound appreciation. Remember the relentless physical labor of the peasant, from dawn till dusk, every single day, just to produce enough food to survive, with a huge portion going to their lord now. Consider your own access to food, a supermarket brimming with endless choices, varied and nutritious, available year-round. The idea of famine, of gnawing hunger as a constant companion, is, for many of us, a distant, abstract concept, not a terrifying daily reality. Even a visit to a local market in modern Vietnam offers a bounty and variety that would astound a medieval European. And what about the constant threat of being branded an outcast? Like the leper, simply for falling ill in your world. Empathy and medical care are the responses to illness, not ostracization. While prejudice still exists, the societal mechanisms for isolation and condemnation on the basis of disease have largely been dismantled. The very concept of human rights, of inherent dignity regardless of one's physical condition, is a cornerstone of modern thought. A stark contrast to the medieval perception of illness as divine punishment, one profound, yet often unstated. Callback to these historical hardships is the enduring human spirit, despite the overwhelming odds. The constant threat of death, the relentless toil, and the pervasive fear. Medieval people found ways to endure, to create art, to practice faith, and to find moments of joy. Their resilience is a quiet testament to the fundamental human will to survive and thrive. Even in the most brutal of circumstances, historians still debate the precise tipping points that led to the decline of feudalism and the rise of more modern societies. With some emphasizing economic changes, others technological innovation, and still others, shifts in philosophical thought. However, it is clear that the relentless hardship described tonight eventually gave way to a world where life, while still challenging, became fundamentally more secure and more comfortable for the average person. So, as the last echoes of the medieval world fade into the quiet hum of your modern space, let this journey be a gentle reminder. Let it deepen your appreciation for the simple fact of clean water, abundant food, effective medicine, and the freedom from constant, life-threatening toil. Let it be a soothing thought, knowing that the struggles of the past have, in many ways, paved the way for the comforts of your present, your own life. With all its contemporary annoyances, truly stands as a testament to humanity's gradual, often hard-won, ascent from the truly sucky realities of medieval existence.